Evening, dog parents. So pancreatitis is a life-threatening condition in dogs where essentially an enzyme is released too early and the dog effectively starts to digest itself, which is as bad as it sounds. Now, in mild to moderate cases, the prognosis can be quite good and most dogs do survive, but in severe cases, unfortunately, over 50% of dogs actually perish from that. Now, this video is about recognising the symptoms because the faster we get help with pancreatitis, the better the prognosis, but also about my experiences with my own dog Bolt when he developed pancreatitis last year. Now, one of the key symptoms is lethargy. So the dog seems to be extremely tired and isn't, running around like it normally is. Then that is one of the classic signs of pancreatitis. So on its own, it might not mean much, but you definitely need to pay attention to it when you consider the other symptoms as well. Another classic symptom is abdominal pain, which is hard to recognise in a dog. Vets can usually feel the dog's tummy and recognise when it's in pain, but it's a bit harder as an owner to recognise, but that is one of the symptoms. As an owner, one of the key things to look out for is if your dog is vomiting. Now, if it vomits multiple times in a day, or it vomits over multiple days, then that is a sure sign that something's wrong. And regardless of whether it's pancreatitis or not, you should always get your dog checked out by a vet, because that is a sign of so many different serious illnesses that whenever your dog is vomiting like that, you should get it seen to. Now, a classic thing of pancreatitis to look out for is if the vomit is tinged pink or red or has streaks of blood in, because that's a really serious sign. So if you notice that, you should suspect pancreatitis and definitely take your dog to the vet straight away. If your dog is vomiting a lot, particularly if it's not drinking, it can very quickly lead to severe dehydration, collapse and shock. So it's a definite thing to look out for and act on upon immediately. You should also be aware that pancreatitis can exist in a chronic form, where instead of developing over a couple of days or quite quickly with the acute form, it can develop over several weeks and last a long time. Now, in that sort of situation, the dog generally doesn't get as sick, but you still need to take action and get them to the vet, although it may be harder to recognise in that case. Now, my own experience with pancreatitis, it all started when Bolt stole a raw sausage that had dropped on the kitchen floor. Now, he was fine that day, but the next day he started to develop diarrhoea, and I didn't worry too much about it at the time. I just assumed it was a little bit of food poisoning or an unsettled stomach because he wasn't used to eating that kind of thing. So I put him on some chicken rice and I thought, we'll just see how it goes for a couple of days. Now, the timing for us was a little bit unfortunate because we'd actually driven up to the Lake District to visit my parents on our way to the Scottish Highlands. We were on holiday at the time. So, second day, still had diarrhoea, didn't worry too much. But on the third day, he started to be sick. And it was like a really biley, sort of frothy sort of sick. So I thought I'd better get him checked by a vet. Now, obviously, being miles away from home, we couldn't go to our regular vet. So I rang around, but unfortunately, no one had any space to see him. So we had to wait until the next day when we headed up to Inverness. Because we'd only planned to stay in Inverness for one night, I rang ahead to make sure that a vet could see him that day. And we were lucky enough, we could get him into the vets. So they took him in and they did some tests, including a test for pancreatitis, and unfortunately that came back positive. Now, they explained the prognosis that it wasn't necessarily great because it can be life-threatening, but that we had acted nice and early. So, we had a reasonable chance of getting him through it. So they wanted to keep him in that day, and they admitted sort of IV fluids. They gave him something to protect his stomach and some anti-nausea medication. At the end of the day, they released him back to us, which wasn't great because we were staying in a hotel at the time. But, we could be with him anyway and look after him. So that's what we did. But they told us to come back the next day and readmit him, which we did. We spent the next day waiting in a cafe pretty much outside the vet because no one really fancied doing any of the tourist or sightseeing type things because we were all quite worried about him. So we just hung around and waited for the news. And at the end of the day, they said he'd started to pick up and he was looking a bit better, but that we still had to go back the next day to readmit him. Now, this was a bit of a problem because we only had a hotel for one night. So what we did, not wanting to go to we were planning to go to the Isle of Mull, where we wouldn't necessarily be able to get to a vet. So we decided to change all our plans, cancel that trip to the Isle of Mull, and started looking for a hotel in Inverness instead. So we stayed the night, and we took him back the next day. And again, they put him on IV for the day and give him all the medications. But fortunately, by about midday, they actually called us back in because he'd picked up so much that he was just chewing through his IV lines and being bold basically. So they said he was well enough to go, and hopefully he shouldn't need any more treatment. But what they did do was they sent us away with some pain medication, some stomach protectorants, and we got some more GI food, because obviously travelling we couldn't cook the usual chicken and rice that we would do normally. So that day he picked up more and more, and by the next day he was pretty much back to his old self. He was wanting to chase balls, play and run around, which is a massive weight off our minds because I was actually really scared I was going to lose him. About 3 days later, we actually climbed our first mountain together, so he bounced back so quickly. And that was partly, I think, because he's a very young dog. At the time he was about a year old, so quite young, very fit, a very active dog. And I'm sure that helped him sort of bounce back as quickly as he did. But we climbed the mountain, we had a great holiday together in the end, and a year on, we haven't had any repeat occurrences. It's been absolutely fine. We have changed his diet, so he's now on like a weight management diet. Not that he was ever fat or overweight, because he wasn't, but he's on like a low fat diet now, just to make sure that it doesn't ever flare up again. And so far, fingers crossed, it's all been good. So I hope that's useful to somebody, whether you're suspecting that your dog's got pancreatitis or you've just had a diagnosis and you're trying to sort of work out what's going to happen next. Just know, in most cases, when it's mild to moderate, the dog will make a full recovery and they do live a full and active life. You just need to be careful of the diet in the future and make sure you don't get anything too fatty. So I hope that helps. I hope it puts your mind at ease. Look after them.